Woman is a being of long hair and short ideas. This phrase, as sharp as shards of glass, today sounds like a relic from a sexist past, and it is rightly repudiated. It was written by Arthur Schopenhauer, the German philosopher known for his deep pessimism. A man whose worldview was bleak, though his intellect was undeniably brilliant. Before labeling him simply as a bitter misogynist, which to some extent he may have been, it might be worth pausing. Because behind the direct offense, behind the painful generalization, there may lie a more uncomfortable layer of truth. A truth that often echoes silently in the emotional experience of many men. Some scholars suggest that Schopenhauer didn't exactly hate women, but rather the dynamics of desire. What he despised was the way romantic love, which he saw as an illusion, made him vulnerable, expendable, easily replaceable, and behind all his cynicism toward the female sex arises an unsettling question that many men, even today, rarely dare to voice for fear of appearing fragile, possessive, or resentful. Why does she always seem to want something more? Why, even when there is love, connection, and commitment, might the day come when she simply walks away, perhaps into the arms of another? And why does this other man so often seem to represent something specific? Taller, more successful, more confident, more dominant, more of what you feel you're not? Today, we'll delve into this delicate terrain. We'll talk about hypergamy, that controversial concept. We'll explore the quiet power that lies in female choice, and above all, the resentment it can generate. In men, a resentment that, if not understood and confronted, can slowly eat away from the inside. To understand Schopenhauer's view on women and love, one must grasp the core of his philosophy, the will to live, Wille zum Leben. For him, the ultimate reality is not God, nor reason, nor matter. It is a blind, irrational, and insatiable force, a cosmic energy that drives everything that exists, from stone to human, to persist in existence and to reproduce. This will is the root of all desire, and therefore all suffering, because to desire is to lack, and the will is never satisfied. Within this framework, romantic love, this experience poets and artists have idealized for centuries, is nothing more than a clever illusion, a biological trap created by the will to live to fulfill its rawest goal, the reproduction of the species. Here lies the tragedy of the lover. You believe you are choosing your partner for her unique qualities, her smile, her intelligence, the way she makes you feel. You think love is the most authentic expression of who you are. But Schopenhauer would disagree. To him, this choice is not made by you, by your conscious self, your soul, or personality. It is the species itself choosing, driven by an unconscious impulse for genetic perpetuation. And when a woman chooses a man according to this cold and impersonal logic, her decision, though it may seem guided by affection, compatibility, or admiration, is actually deeply rooted in an instinctive calculation, often invisible even to her. She's not necessarily thinking about the kindness in your heart, your sensitivity, or the depth of your conversations. Her instinct, shaped by millions of years of evolution, is silently evaluating, measuring, comparing. The questions her nature asks, even without words, are direct. Can this man protect me? Can he provide security for me and the children we may have? Do you have the resources, strength, emotional stability, and health that ensure a good inheritance for my descendants? Do you possess intelligence, vigor, social status? These are the qualities that, according to Schopenhauer, silently operate behind attraction and what we call love. It's not to him about poetry or romance, but a biological, ruthless calculation orchestrated by the blind force he called the will to live. This process does not obey the individual heart, but rather the impulse to perpetuate the species. And the way this impulse manifests, especially in female choice, has a name: hypergamy. Let's be direct. Hypergamy is the tendency, identified by various studies across eras and cultures, for women to seek partners of equal or higher status, be it financially, intellectually, physically, or socially. It is an unconscious strategy but deeply rooted. The term, it must be said, is not a moral judgment. It does not mean that all women act this way consciously, nor that this is right or wrong. It is an anthropological, sociological observation, a behavioral pattern, nothing more. But still, for many men, it hurts. It hurts because maybe you've been through it. You gave yourself to a relationship. You were loyal, caring, present. You tried to be a good partner. You invested time, affection, energy. You believed you were building something together, and then sometimes suddenly, other times through a slow distancing you didn't quite understand, she left. And the blow is even harsher when, not long after, you see her with another man. And this man is rarely perceived as less than you. Quite the opposite. He seems to possess exactly those qualities that society, and perhaps her deepest instinct, values. He's taller, stronger, more successful, more confident, has more money, seems more in control, more commanding. He is something you were not, or not enough. And then comes the corrosive doubt. Was this a betrayal? Was it a lack of loyalty? An act of selfishness? A premeditated manipulation? Or was it something more impersonal, more instinctive, just nature taking its course? Schopenhauer's philosophy, with its relentless pessimism, would offer a direct and unsettling answer. It was the will. It wasn't her, as a conscious individual, who rejected you. It was the species, the blind will to live, operating through her impulses and emotions, that chose another. Someone who, in the eyes of this silent and impersonal instinct, offered better chances of genetic perpetuation or social stability. In Schopenhauer's view, both she and you were mere instruments, bodies moved by an irrational force that uses feelings as tools to achieve a greater end, the survival and reproduction of the species. Many would say this is an unfair and deeply reductionist view, as it ignores emotional complexity, affectionate bonds, and individual freedom. And yes, for many critics, it is a cold, dehumanizing perspective that disregards important nuances of the human experience, especially women's. Even so, for many men who have lived through the pain of unexpected rejection, this explanation, harsh as it may be, offers a kind of logic, a dark consolation, a way to make sense of the incomprehensible. Why, even when you give everything, even when you love honestly, are you still not enough? Schopenhauer almost never shouted, he murmured. And it is in that murmur, in the silence, of abandonment, in the dull echo of a comparison that disfavors you, in the sense of having been replaced, that a deep resentment is born. A type of pain few men ever articulate. It's the feeling of having failed even when you gave your best, of having been measured and found lacking, of realizing that despite all your dedication, she chose someone else. And that someone else almost always seems to embody precisely those qualities most valued by society, or by her most primal instincts: strength, security, success, dominance, presence. It is in this fragile terrain that Schopenhauer's philosophy becomes dangerous, because it doesn't speak only of the will as a metaphysical principle. It touches a real wound, a common experience, even if often unspoken. The experience of being rejected not just by a person, but by the system itself. And when we look at the philosopher's biography, this becomes even clearer. His conflicted relationship with his mother, a strong, independent, critical woman, and his romantic frustrations throughout life seem to have left deep scars. Rather than processing this pain, Schopenhauer crystallized it into contempt. His writings on women are filled with sarcasm, bitterness, and offensive generalizations. They are not just philosophy, they are resentment. But that's where the key lies to understanding why, even today, his ideas find an audience. Despite the obvious misogyny, despite the grotesque caricature he paints of women, the driving force behind his words doesn't always stem from pure hatred. Often it comes from humiliation, from the soul-crushing experience of not being chosen, of being compared, evaluated, and deemed less. It is the unspoken cry of a wounded ego. This male resentment rarely expresses itself with vulnerability. We live in a culture that teaches men not to cry, not to show weakness. So this pain wears a disguise. It dons the mask of cynicism, bitter irony, protective sarcasm. It manifests in phrases like, "They're all the same. They only care about money. Love is for fools." It takes refuge in defensive generalizations. In virtual communities where pain turns into doctrine, where the echo of heartbreak is amplified. But if we dig a little deeper beneath that varnish of indifference, what we often find is not pure hatred. It is pain, a wound left open, a love that was offered with sincerity and was not returned as expected. It is the silent suffering of someone who felt invisible, of someone who in the end felt that, no matter how much he gave, it still wasn't enough. There are men who care, protect, and offer everything they can in a relationship. And yet, they are not desired with the same intensity. Men whose deepest longing is simply to be chosen, recognized, and valued for who they are. When that desire is denied, and the frustration has no healthy outlet, it begins to build up and, over time, transforms into resentment. But does that mean women are by nature cold, calculating, or selfish, as Schopenhauer suggested in his darkest moments? Not necessarily. There is a more balanced and less moralistic way to interpret this dynamic. In many aspects of partner selection, women tend to be more pragmatic, and that doesn't make them bad, it makes them human. What is known as hypergamy, the tendency to seek partners with higher social status, resources, or desirable traits, is not a character flaw. It can be understood as a strategy deeply rooted in the evolutionary history of humanity, a way to ensure safety, stability, and better chances of survival for oneself and one's children. Most of the time, this choice does not happen in a conscious or manipulative way. It is instinctive. Think of the distant past when life was harsh and unforgiving. In an era where survival depended on physical strength and the ability to provide, choosing a weak partner could mean death, not just for the woman, but also for her offspring. In that context, selecting a strong, skilled, and respected man wasn't vanity, it was necessity. This behavioral pattern shaped over thousands of generations certain impulses and preferences that still operate today in the background. Of course, the modern world is different, safer, more complex, with fewer immediate threats. However, basic instincts don't disappear overnight. They remain, though transformed. Today, the danger may no longer be a predator or lack of food, but rather a lack of purpose, the absence of ambition, or emotional apathy. The man who does not grow, who does not strive to improve, who remains stagnant becomes a symbolic threat to the idea of progress and security. And this leads us to an uncomfortable realization. Being kind, faithful, and well-intentioned may not be enough. As painful as it is to admit, sometimes not even the sincerest love is enough to keep a woman's desire alive. There is something else, something visceral, almost irrational, that needs to be present. A man needs to be perceived as someone who is moving forward, who has a goal, who inspires respect or admiration, someone who represents motion and direction. This does not mean that women are materialistic or self-interested in the vulgar sense of the term. Just as many men are unconsciously guided by signals of youth and fertility, women too are driven by impulses shaped by biological factors. They want to be beside someone who inspires them, who makes them feel like they are growing, not being dragged down or stuck in place. If we accept, even partially, the idea that there is a hypergamous tendency in female desire, then an inevitable question arises. What can a man do to avoid sinking into the dark well of resentment, the very one Schopenhauer knew so well? How does one heal this invisible, yet deeply felt wound? The first and perhaps most difficult step is to face reality, as it is, not trying to sweeten it with romantic idealism, but also not allowing cynicism to poison it. Accepting the existence of selective patterns in female attraction does not mean adopting a defeatist stance or becoming a victim of biology. It means, above all, understanding the unspoken rules of the game between the sexes. You can spend your life cursing the rain because it ruins your plans, or you can learn to capture that water, to channel it, to use it in your favor. Likewise, instead of rebelling against the nature of desire, one can use it as a starting point for self-knowledge and personal growth. Schopenhauer, even if unconsciously and through a biased lens, points us toward something valuable. The cure for the pain of being rejected or feeling insufficient does not lie in blaming women, nor in trying to please them at all costs. Nor does it lie in closing oneself off in contempt or becoming manipulative. The true path begins with a radical shift in perspective. Stop seeking validation from others and start building it within yourself. And here lies perhaps the most important lesson. Do not enter a draining race to compete with other men for female attention or approval. This kind of competition, fueled by insecurity, often leads to exhaustion and the loss of dignity. Instead, redirect that energy toward a more worthy and constant opponent, the version of yourself that existed yesterday. Invest in your own holistic development. Ask yourself, in what areas can I become better? You can strengthen your body, care for your health, nourish your mind with reading and learning. You can develop emotional intelligence, learn to manage your impulses, to communicate with clarity, to respond with maturity when faced with challenges. You can find a purpose that goes beyond the pursuit of a relationship, something that truly gives meaning to your existence. And in time, something curious happens. When you stop chasing acceptance and start building real, solid value within yourself, you naturally become more compelling, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you become someone with direction, autonomy, consistency. It is this quiet strength, this clarity of presence that tends to genuinely attract. When a man dedicates himself sincerely to his own growth, not to impress others but out of a deep commitment to himself, he begins to emit a different kind of energy. He becomes more confident, more grounded, more capable, and above all, less dependent on external validation. And that presence and that sense of self-mastery has a quiet magnetism. He no longer needs to chase love or beg for desire. Instead, he begins to naturally attract what he once pursued with such effort. And if even then love does not come, or if a relationship ends, he will not be destroyed. Because his value no longer hangs on the scales of someone else's choice. His center of gravity now resides within himself. This is the true meaning of the Übermensch, not the one who collects conquests to inflate the ego, but the one who conquers himself, who faces his fears, masters his impulses, and rises above his own resentments. Nietzsche, who at times criticized and at times admired Schopenhauer, understood this image deeply. The man who recreates himself, who transforms pain into strength, who rebuilds where he once resented. Let us return to that uncomfortable yet fundamental idea. She wants something better. There always seems to be an instinctive radar guiding her toward what represents greater value, whether it's status, security, vitality, or genetic potential. But perhaps this shouldn't be seen as betrayal, nor as a verdict of inadequacy. Perhaps we should understand this impulse as an invitation, a call for men to also desire something greater from themselves, to not settle, to not hide behind frustration. The fact that she seeks the best doesn't mean you must live under the shadow of constant judgment. It simply means that you too have the chance and the responsibility to pursue your own greatness. Not to please, not to be chosen, but to be whole. To build a life that stands on its own, that doesn't depend on anyone's presence to have meaning. Do not beg for love. Do not cling to loneliness out of fear. Do not cultivate hatred for what you cannot control or possess. Work on yourself. Build your inner world. Because yes, she might leave, she might compare you, she might judge you. That is the freedom of the other, and it is painful, but it is real. And you, in turn, can rise every day, look in the mirror, and choose to keep growing, to become someone whose solidity doesn't shatter in the face of abandonment, someone who doesn't fear being left because he knows he will survive, who has the strength to start again, the clarity to rebuild, the courage to move forward. True, confidence doesn't come from the certainty of never being rejected. No one can guarantee that. It comes from knowing, even if that happens, I will still stand. And it is precisely there, at that point of autonomy and balance, that you become most attractive. Because freedom attracts, self-control attracts, the absence of desperate neediness attracts. And if you've made it this far, pause for a moment and be honest with yourself. Have you ever felt the suffocating weight of not being enough for someone? Has it ever hurt to realize that, in the Yosgao, intricate marketplace of desire, you weren't the highest bid? Have you ever carried the bitter taste of resentment in silence? Or somehow did you manage to turn that pain into fuel? Not to feed bitterness, but to grow, to become stronger, clearer, more whole. The answer, of course, isn't simple, and the path is never the same for everyone. But here's an invitation. Reflect. Look inward. And if you feel like it, share your thoughts in the comments. Not to complain, not to point fingers, but to open up a space for honest dialogue. If this journey through the provocative, and at times uncomfortable, ideas of Schopenhauer touched you in any way, perhaps it's worth continuing to explore. Not to justify old wounds, but to understand ourselves. After all, understanding the labyrinth of human desire, so contradictory, so deep, is also a way of understanding who we are, and maybe, just maybe, of becoming more conscious and freer versions of ourselves. Thank you for making it this far. Until next time.